Okay, well, thanks everybody for dropping in. So I'm going to talk about my self-tracking and experiments and etc. And let's see, why is this not? There we go. All right, so we'll start off with a couple quotes that I like. I've written about self-tracking and experimentation, and these quotes, I'm not going to read them, but I kind of like them. It talks about, the needs for what we do, investigating how well things work. So a little bit of background, I kind of got started on this with a bout of Lyme disease and then eventually got chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I really learned through some painful starting early days with various doctors, keeping track of everything, learning from that, eventually self-experimenting and making adjustments. So this talk's going to be kind of in two parts. So I'm going to talk about what I do, including some of the analyses and experiments I've done, and then I'll talk about kind of the results, how I'm doing these days. And of course, the disclaimer, it's not medical advice. So a couple of things about me, my background. I am previously electrical engineer. I've done design, I've done software design, I've done systems engineering, eventually got into project management and consider myself a subject matter expert in that and planning an organization. But the medical side is somewhat more recent, and sometimes I've been mistaken for other doctors have mistaken me for a doctor. So that's kind of cool. I've presented at medical conferences. I've been on podcasts. I've taught breath work. And then on the other side of me, I guess you can see the easel in the background. I'm an artist. I'm also a musician. I do a lot of international travel. I hold a meditation healing group twice a month for women, a couple other things. So I do a lot of self-tracking, not everything every day, but for example, I can look back to a date in the last 13 years and find out what pills I was taking and what doses. So I keep very close tabs on that. I have a 200-page document on my doctor visits since 2013 that include notes and what my goals and what my symptoms were at the time. The rest of the things on this list, I have a couple spreadsheets with probably a couple hundred tabs with data, analyses, graphs, etc. Recently, I've been doing more on human benchmark, if you know what that is, for reaction time and aim trainer and things like that. And then because I'm an artist, also color hue discrimination. Right now, I'm in the top 1% on that. I kind of partly learned, partly just, probably genetics.
Sorry,
I have.
On what?
Sorry?
On what? 1%? I didn't hear the word, sorry.
Oh, so they give you a score at the end and they tell you where you stand and the rest of the people who've taken the test. So color hue discrimination has to do with sorting color squares into a range from one hue to another. And it could be from a hue of red to a hue of green or a continuum of purples. And you sort them and then it gives you a score after about 16 of those. So I apparently am in the top 1% for that. And I love blending colors. I like pastel. I like color pencil. So I have currently 3 wearables that I wear all the time. The Whoop strap I've had for 4 years, Oura Ring 5.5 years of data. Fitbit I have 7.5 years of steps data, and we'll talk more about that. And a couple other things. I like to focus on heart rate variability, also VO2 max and grip strength. I do have a handheld dynamometer for measuring that. So these are some of the things that I take and that's what I do for what I consider anti-aging hacks. Some of those are varying degrees of hacks and some of them are becoming more mainstream. And of course, all that assumes good sleep, good diet, and good exercise. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I change my supplements continuously based on new research. I add some, I drop some. I don't take them all the time. Especially the quercetin and fisetin, I pulse those. I do also take, it's not on here, but I also take nicotinamide riboside, known as NR. I've taken NMN in the past. I do pulse those as well. I've had NAD infusions. I'm not currently in doing that. This is my typical workout routine. I do intervals once or twice a week. I do weightlifting at the gym probably twice a week with a pretty long 2-hour regimen. And then in between that, I do a lot of walking just for low intensity cardio. If you've known about Phil Maffetone's training, go slow to go fast. I try to practice that, a lot of zone 2 stuff. So here's an interesting experiment. I don't know if any of you know what the Moxie monitor is. So there's a couple other competing things. It's it's kind of a rubber patch with electronics in it and some sensors that you can put on your muscles, and it measures your oxygen saturation of your muscle capillaries. You know, you've heard of a pulse oximeter where you put a pulse oximeter on your finger. This measures the flow in your muscles. So a lot of cyclists will use this for training. So I've always known that my warm-up time seems slower than other people. So I decided to adapt this. I actually rented this device rather than bought one because they are expensive. So the top curve shows my heartbeat, and you can see it both the maximum and minimum. So I was going up a hill and then down a hill, and up a hill and down a hill. And you can see the heartbeat going up, and then it kind of plateaus after 7 loops of this 13 loops on this hill. The next curve in blue is the muscle oxygen saturation. So you can see again after about 7, the bottom part is during the work part, and the lower it goes, the lower the oxygen is going to muscle. So after a while, it kind of stabilizes. And the third curve in orange is the total hemoglobin, which is a proxy for actual blood flow through the capillary bed. And you can see that that also, the curve to the right of that, although it jumps up and down a little bit, it kind of reaches a new level again after about 7 loops. And that equated to about 14 to 15 minutes. And that was consistent with what I thought was my warm-up time for my muscles. Now, of course, this is walking. There's, probably variations in temperature and time of day and other things. But that's an example of something that I've done. Any questions about that? It's a little bit complex. All right. So I'll move on, but we can come back to that if there is. So I mentioned steps. I've got a lot of steps data. I've done a lot of analysis. I've looked at sleep, for example. The bottom left curve is steps versus recovery based on the Whoop strap the next day. And recovery for that strap is based on heart rate variability a lot, but also your sleep and your resting heart rate. So it's a little bit, not a lot high correlation, but it kind of peaks, somewhere in the 10,000, 12,000 range. When you get to 20,000, it starts going back down. I've had as many as over 50,000 steps in a day. And I didn't sleep well that night. I was so exhausted. On the lower end, you probably want to get at least 5,000 or 6,000 steps. The next curve on the bottom middle is my total steps by month over the last 7 years or so. And it is on average slowly increasing, which I think is good. You can see the 50,000, the month when it occurred in July of 2022, where that peak, that was from a single day on a trip where I was doing a lot of walking. It also is cyclical over the year. It peaks in the summer. February is typically my low month. I have trouble getting out in the dreary weather in February. I do have an elliptical, but it's not as fun as getting out in the woods. And the top curve, just have very limited data. I looked at my HDL cholesterol versus monthly steps. I looked at the prior month, the prior 3 months, and maybe one other thing. And there was a pretty good correlation. The more steps I get, the more my HDL goes up. And some of these things are obvious, but I like to verify them for myself. This spreadsheet's not meant to be readable, but it's an example of looking at many behaviors affected on heart rate variability, both the next day, the next 2 days, the week after, and I'll come back to more of that, but just an example. It's kind of a very busy spreadsheet. And so we'll talk more about that in the coming charts. So this is from a study I did for a company that distributes some medical equipment. I looked at this software that is very sophisticated, measuring your heart rate variability. And I wanted to confirm that it could measure the response on heart rate variability for various integrative or functional medicine therapies. And so I have a control there. Then there's a device called a newbie, which is a pulse to DC therapy device, which one of my local clinicians has that I've gotten some therapy on it. I looked at that massage, 5-9, if you know what 5-9 breathing is, where you breathe in for 5, count of 5, breathe out for 9. You do that, and that will boost your heart rate variability. The slower you breathe, the better your heart rate variability goes up. And it's an acute thing, but over time it will help. Then acupuncture, then sunshine, then outdoors, and combine outdoors and sunshine. So the statistical significance on here was not for everything, but you can see most of them were better than control. And this paper was uploaded to OSF. I didn't go through all the formal rigmarole, so I didn't get to try to get it published in a journal, but it's out there. And then another curve, I looked at just the newbie's effect on various aspects. So 2 or 3 statistics from heart rate variability are the SDNN, the RMS SSD, and SI, which is Biofsky stress index, and then a 4th one called health, which the software is a composite measure of your overall health based on that. And again, generally better than control, but only a couple of them reach statistical significance of 0.05. This study was only about 7 different subjects. So that's probably why the power was not high enough for everything. So now this is my personal experience with newbie. The red triangles are the treatment days over a period of weeks. The light green is my heart rate variability from 2 sources, being my Oura Ring and my Whoop strap. And it jumps up and down by day. But then I once started treatment, it started ramping up. So another confirmation that it was being effective. And given this, the doctor who I was receiving this from, he's had recent success treating long COVID patients and bringing them back to full functionality using this device. And so I'm currently working with the manufacturer in Texas and this doctor, and we're pursuing a grant from NIH. They have a very large program called Recover for long COVID research, of which I've also been involved, or I've been selected to be a volunteer in one of their advisory committees. So I'll probably report more on that at some time. Some other personal experiences. This is days again from that big graph that had all that stuff. This is some dialing in, looking at sauna and how many days in between. And basically the punchline is the more frequently I did sauna, the more my heart rate variability would go up in the day after. If I waited a long time, the effect was not as great. That was kind of curious. So basically reinforcing the need to get regular sauna treatment. I don't have one, but my gym has one, and that helps. But I like the gym is traditional one. I like the infrared sauna better. Here's some data on sunshine. Like these are increments of 30 minutes being outdoors. So the more I was outdoor one day, the next day my recovery from my Whoop strap, which is based on partly on HRV, that would go up. Not a really strong correlation, but pretty good. So the Whoop strap has an app, and you can report different behaviors each morning, and over time it will tell you which behaviors are good and bad for your overnight recovery. So It varies over time, but typically good sleep, time outdoors, breath work, which I typically do as part of my meditation, acupuncture, exercising with hyperoxia, and taking melatonin for good sleep. Those help me the most typically, and not surprisingly, alcohol or having a late meal, those interfere with my sleep, and then recovery is not that good. Consistency between devices. I'm not sure how everybody's are who have both devices, and there's probably not a lot, but I started noticing back in 2021 diverging differences in the heart rate variability, and then it stabilized in 2022, but it still jumps around and it differs by a lot. I don't know why. I haven't studied it, but just bring it to people's attention. And because of that, I rely more on the relative changes in these rather than the absolute values. These are a couple other experiments. I just listed them, didn't necessarily have a lot of nice graphs or things, but I've experimented with sleep hygiene, melatonin dose, mattress firmness, extra blanket. Analyses on, so I had some vitamin deficiencies, and I was able to get some pretty sophisticated tests that looked at three aspects of vitamins. Number one, what's in your blood. Number two, what's getting into the cells, in this case, RBCs and white blood cells. And then some functional assessments of how well the cells were using those nutrients, such as folate. And I found that there's an apparent cellular membrane absorption issue. So the lipophilic vitamins like vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin D were not getting absorbed as well. So basically, I'll just take larger doses and kind of flood the receptors, and that seems to have helped. I keep records on plaque scores from my dental visits. I tried comparison between manual and electric toothbrush, didn't find any effect. At times, because of the chronic fatigue, I've had days with very high fatigue and therefore low activity. But looking at my recovery scores, I realized that just resting was not beneficial. I had to at least get some light activity, because if I just rested, my fatigue got worse, actually. So that was really interesting. I like nitric oxide. I used nitric oxide test strips to measure that. And I found that a supplement called Vasconox and beetroot powder worked the best for me. There's other things like arginine, citrulline, and beet juice. Summer and fall are my high seasons. Winter and early spring, I'm not as energetic. And I looked at annual variations in some hormones and neurotransmitters, and sure enough, they track annual patterns. Like, for example, cortisol. My cortisol levels are better in the summer and fall and lower otherwise. So now results. So I'll start with biological age. I do a lot of work in this area. I've written papers on it. I've presented at conferences on it. I have done a whole lot of different tests. Some of them complimentary by these companies. And my average though is pretty good. It's about 9 years younger than my actual age. So I'm 66, and so I think I'm doing pretty good for that. My rate of aging is pretty good. It's not among the leaders on the there's a couple leaderboards out there like Brian Johnson and True Diagnostics, etc. But 0.86 means I'm only aging at 86% of the rate of a calendar time. That's pretty good. And then a new one I found, David Sinclair, I think, popularized an earlier study looking at your fingernail growth speed. It gets slower as you age. And my first attempt at that indicated I was 10 to 12 years younger than my calendar age. And then a later one, and it's based on multiple samples, it was even more like 20 years younger. But anyway, there's a lot of variation.
So question, sorry,
Yeah.
about this one. So your telomere age is 27?
Yeah, it was a few years ago.
How is that measured?
they look at them and then compare them to population averages, I guess.
So there's an actual measurement of your telomeres. It's not an estimation based from like DNA methylation or something like that.
I don't know. Hey, John, do you know anything more about that?
Well, I do know with True Diagnostics that it's a methylation estimation of telomeres.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have a view about True Diagnostics estimations of things like HbA1c and the like. Because I do weekly blood tests, I know that my HbA1c is normally about 5 or 4.8. It has been as low as 4.18, but True Diagnostics had it something like 6.5. And you know, when you're doing a weekly blood test that tells you it's about 5 and they tell you it's 6.5, it raises questions about the methodology. And I think the same problem exists with telomeres, to be honest.
Yeah.
Their telomeres one.
Yeah. And the first test was by a company, Vibrant, but I probably know even less about their methods, although they provide some really interesting micronutrient and toxicology blood tests.
Mm. I found a hair test was very good, but that's not. It doesn't give you a biological age. I'm also not really persuaded of the glycan age test myself.
Yeah, I had a long conversation with a guy, debrief from that, and yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, I know about glycans. I pay attention to them, but yeah, and you know. So what's also becoming common, some of you probably know, or maybe all of you, is their stout and our stout now is starting to look at individual organs. And, you know, your average one is not going to be the one that kills you. It's going to be the worst case.
Well,
so I'm starting to pay attention to that. So, for example, I'm getting a cardiac stress test in a couple of weeks, mostly because of a coronary calcification score. But I've read that if you can pass a stress test, most of the other indicators are not as worrisome for cardiovascular concerns.
As people know here, and I think, Chris, you've heard me talk about my own view as to the methodology, what the mechanism is that cause aging, which is linked to actually the state of each individual mitochondrion. So you're going to get not just different mitochondria at different sort of levels of fitness, but then different cells and different organs, and it gets quite complex. And most of the measurements that are done inherently are done on blood, and in the blood it's mainly on the white blood cells because that's what is easy to get access to. So it doesn't give you necessarily that. It gives you information. How actionable it is, I don't know, but it's a difficult one. I've moved away from getting. I focus really on biomarkers that mean something, rather than something that is trying to distill everything down to one number, and in that methodology, perhaps doesn't give us that much information.
Yeah. So I've had mitochondrial tests. Probably not the latest. I had the Ginfinity test, I think. For NAD, my NAD was around that of a 25-year-old, so I think that was pretty good.
It's difficult to get mitochondria. I don't think there are retail mitochondrial DNA tests.
There's a company in Germany that somebody I know is starting to work with, but I don't know a lot about it.
But you see, then you still got this problem of which cells are you testing? You know, yes, to some extent, the body spreads around mitochondria and spreads around mitochondrial DNA, but actually it does matter. And you know, looking at, say, the nervous system is protected particularly by the CSF, so it deteriorates at a slower rate.
Yeah. All right, a couple more tests that are interesting. So I'm really curious about this. My VO2 max seems pretty steady, and I'll have the sources of that on the next chart. I have a history of asthma, but it's almost completely controlled in recent years. And I get a annual spirometry test. And back around 2015, my lung age tests before that were not so good, but I did start some pretty serious breathwork around 2021, and it's been pretty good lately. So I think that's, tracking pretty flat right now. I also get a DEXA bone density scan every 3 years. And to my doctor's surprise, the last two have each gotten better than the previous one, which is unusual for people my age. And I get also an online neuropsych exam, and that has improved the last 2 times as well. So pretty curious.
Sorry, this last test that you mentioned, vital signs, what does it measure?
There's things with reaction speed, memory tests,
Okay.
kind of processing. I do get a separate test that actually wears a headset. And that one's also, I score a lot of parts of that in the 90s and above. I think the weakest area, there's some processing delay. But I try to keep sharp with that. I play, I'm I'm an avid video gamer. I play a number of real-time video games with my sons to keep sharp with just, fast decision making. The video gamers have like an actions per minute metric, and some of those are just amazing. I'm nowhere near that, but I think it helps, keep that reaction time and eye hand, movement and stuff, moving the mouse and stuff and keys. PhenoAge, I think, as a Dr. Levine, who used to be with Yale, I think she, Morgan Levine, I think she was involved in coming up with this. When I came with the model, I did a retrospective plot of my PhenoAge. It's based on blood tests that you get in your annual physical pretty much. And that's actually been going down since the 2015 timeframe. And then I looked at what's involved and I plotted my RDW, which is red blood cell distribution width, and lower is better. And that has just taken a dive. And that's like, I know somebody who's very informed about this, and they were just floored. They've never seen anything like this. And it's not clear to me what I'm doing that's led to that, but clearly it's been a good trend.
Are you taking rapamycin at all?
No.
No,
Now I do take a couple of things which are considered rapalogs, but they're not as powerful as rapamycin, as I understand.
What do you take then?
Well, I think either quercetin or fisetin is a partial rapalog. I do take metformin. I've taken berberine at times.
I don't think they're really around the sort of mTOR inhibition type stuff.
Certainly not strong. Yeah, I've read a couple of articles around rapalogs, and I flagged a couple of them that I take, but my memory on that right now is not complete.
Sorry, and this PhenoAge model, is it based on common blood test panels? I see. Is this something that anyone can do when they're taking their common blood test?
Yeah, there's websites. I think it might be called Thrivius. I don't know what they do, but I think Thrivius had a web page where you can just type it in for free. There's things like the white blood cells, and one thing that maybe your doctor may not always order is your CRP, which is an inflammation marker. But the things from the blood cell panel and the metabolic panel. Oh, there you go. Great. So in the chat window. All right, a little bit about, heart rate, VO2 max, and calorie expenditure. I did a hike in Sweden above the Arctic Circle a couple of years ago, and included a technical ascent of Mount Kebnekaise, and that really completely wore me out. But I burned about 7,000 calories that day. Take care, Lauren. Thanks. So I thought that was a pretty good idea of. I I kind of pushed myself because I was asthmatic as a child and try to see what I can do. My resting heart rate recently as low as 50. I remember it was low as 52 in 2013, but I don't have a lot of records of that in particular. My VO2 max I mentioned seemed pretty stable. I had if you're familiar with the cardiopulmonary exercise test where you're on a stationary bike and they're measuring your arterial blood gases and all that, you have a mask on. And my VO2 max, that's probably like the standard at the time. That was 41.6. I have a polar heart rate monitor and that has an app. I don't know how accurate it is, but that reported 41 back in 2017. Stationary bike app in the gym in 2022 reported 38. And Whoop has recently added that to their app and that reported 41. So it makes me feel pretty good that it's pretty stable over those years. The other thing though, I'm not clear about, my max heart rate I've achieved has been declining and more quickly than you'd expect. This year I've only been able to hit 148 when I would expect more like 160. So I've got to figure out what's going on there. I do have some physical limitations. I have a knee problem, a wrist problem. I'm no longer able to sleep more than 5 or 6 hours a night. Don't know what's completely behind that. I do pay a lot of attention to sleep hygiene. I don't currently have any easy remedies. My orthopedist says I'm heading for a knee replacement. But if you've heard of the biofoam from BioChange in Israel, they basically cured a horse's arthritic knee in 2 weeks with a biofoam injection. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the FDA will approve that soon.
Do you take boron?
You know, I took that for a while. I'm not currently taking it, but I'm thinking about restarting.
Yeah. It has a good reputation for 3 milligrams a day in terms of arthritis.
Yeah. And some of you may or may not know, you've heard of borax, the washing machine additive for cleaning your clothes. You can put that in your bath. I take a bath with borax. And of course they tell you not to. And at one time it was outlawed, I think in England, to do that. But it's good for your skin. So I put borax in with my Epsom salts when I take a bath occasionally. It's good for your skin. The population in Turkey apparently gets extra doses of boron because it's in the ground a lot. It's just FYI. But thanks for that, John. So everything I've learned, I try to give back with that. The study I did was free. I did that for a medical device distributor. And I've also demonstrated their system to various acupuncturists. And then eventually they were calling me for troubleshooting support because I knew the system so well, because they sell it to other clinics in the country. And but the software is made by the Russians, and they are having difficulty getting tech support from Russia given the war in Ukraine. I've been on one NIH advisory committee, and I'm now about to be on a second. I write articles for Anti-Aging Firewalls, and I mentioned the pursuing the long COVID research grant. So try to, like I said, give back. I'm also recruiting for a new study. I applied for a grant to the National Academy of Medicine in the US. I think there's an opportunity to correlate the behaviors reported in the Whoop app with biological age. So I'm looking for people who have both the Whoop strap and who do biological age tests. So I'm trying to get the word out for that. And then different topic, but AI is certainly getting a lot of attention these days. And both as a learning process and also entertaining. I'm starting a twice a monthly AI-based discovery and learning group. And I'm pulling people from all walks of life to give, share what people do. I have, a lawyer, I have a physicist, I have doctors, I have artists, I have musicians, I have housewives, I have programmers. So try to keep them getting too big, but I do have a few more spots if people are interested. So just message me. So thanks everybody for dialing in. Here's a couple of references. The guys in Finland, you may know them. I bought their Biohackers Handbook years ago. That was pretty interesting. And then the blog site I've written for. There's the name of the webpage there. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I remember you mentioned something about the newbie HRV measuring system. Was
Yes.
that a device or a mix of interventions?
So it's a device. It's made by a company in Texas, and it is kind of expensive. It runs probably about $20,000. So it's used for various purposes. It's FDA approved in the U.S. It's used for, like, after injury, retraining muscles. So they'll put these patches on you in different places, and they'll take a reading of how your muscles are firing. Like, say you're doing a squat, they'll see how your muscles are firing, and then they will move them around until they find maybe a weak signal where certain muscles are not contributing as they should. And then they will move the patches, and they will provide pulsed DC to help those muscles relearn how to fire during that move. So that's one way it's used. But now they're also using it to kind of reset your autonomic nervous system, because it's kind of learning your autonomic nervous system to handle stress better and not to be so jittery in some manners. And so that my local clinician I work from, again, he's treated long COVID patients successfully, and I'm trying to get NIH to include that in their studies as a treatment for long COVID. So the company is NewFit, and they're in Texas. I don't know if it's sold international, but that's a good question. I have a relationship with the medical director at the company there, and I can ask her that. I am curious.
Thank you. And I know you've mentioned something about nitric oxide and consuming certain foods in order to increase that. And I find it interesting. My knowledge about it is quite limited. So the only thing I read about it is that you can stimulate the production of nitric oxide in your sinuses by doing specific breathwork practices. I didn't know that you can control what you consume in terms of, nutrition, in terms of food in order to increase that.
Yeah, so as you may know, nitric oxide is important for dilating your blood vessels. So I have had, I don't have overly high blood pressure, but it's slightly elevated, and I don't want to take blood pressure medications. And so I've been working for years on trying different things, and the combination of the Vasconox, which has a couple of different, it's a natural product, I believe, based on different herbs and vegetables, and then the beetroot powder that I put in my morning smoothie shake, and my blood pressure has been relatively normal. So these things include nitrates as a natural vegetable source, and that helps convert to the nitric oxide. There's a enzyme, and there's two kinds of nitric oxide that are generated. There's the type that is used for attacking different organisms in your body, and I forget the enzyme names. There's one that starts with I and one that starts with an E. Yeah, it's if you have high blood pressure, it's a good thing to look at, and it also is good for men.
Yeah. And regarding the 5-9 breath practice, I find that interesting because I love down-regulating practices like that. I mostly do 4-8, but I'm not constant with it. So I realize that I do this practice only when I feel stressed or I have an exam coming up or a medical intervention. Do you think it's the type of thing that one should do consistently or daily if they want to see a result in their nervous system, an actual result?
I don't think you have to do it constantly to see a result, but in general, your exhalation should be longer than your inhalation, and your breathing rate should be lower if possible. Like for most people, your breathing rate at around 6 times a minute will peak your heart rate variability. There's a curve that most people peak around 6 per minute, whereas most people actually breathe in the range of 9 to 15 to 20 breaths per minute. So when I started practicing breath work, my breathing rate came down from maybe 15 to 13 overnight consistently. When I meditate, I try to get my breathing rate down to between 3 and 4 breaths per minute. And I can tell you, after about 15 minutes of that, my whole consciousness switches. I mean, it's like a switch, and it's just like, it's really, it feels great. You're just in another world. But it's not always easy to get down to 3 or 4. I have a pulse oximeter, which measures down my breathing rate down to 4. It doesn't measure to 3, but based on time, and I can count and just pace myself to get down to 3.
Okay.
And, yeah, but if you're meditating and try that, it's really interesting.
What I tried so far is listening to a guided
Yes.
track that helps you count to have 5 or 6 breaths per minute.
Yeah, there's also a device and an app called HeartMath, which
Okay.
does that as well. Yeah, they're similar.
HeartMath.
HeartMath, yes.
Okay.
It's a little clip you put on your ear, and it measures your heart rate and your heart rate variability, and it paces you, and it helps you get into what they call coherence
Mhm.
between your heart and your breathing, and that boosts your heart rate variability.
I will look that up. Thank you.
Chris, I had a question. Just now, you mentioned that when you practice like 4 breaths per minute and meditate for like 10 to 15 minutes, you experience some sort of altered state of consciousness. Could you elaborate on what exactly you experience, and like, are there any like methods to track that that whole idea of like altered state of consciousness? Is it like a metaphorical thing, or is it actually a real thing that can be tracked in some way?
So that's a great question. I'm working on that. I do have a couple ways to measure my brain waves. To some, I don't have a multi-point headset. I have basically a 2-point head clip, and then I have something which I'll talk about in a minute. But what I feel, the most interesting thing that I generally feel when that switch happens is unconditional universal love. Like, I will admit that growing up, I had stereotypes of overweight people. And when this happens, I just imagine myself hugging them and loving them unconditionally. It's just a wonderful feeling. Now I've measured myself. You can't really see it too well, but behind myself, I have a dedicated meditation space with like Tree of Life and Buddha tapestries and candles. And when I measure my heart rate variability or my brain waves, and I sit in another room, measure it, and then go in there, everything else jumps. Just physically being in there, all of that jumps. But I am working on, I've seen some hard switches from delta waves, which indicates, fatigue and overwork, into the high beta waves, and or sometimes, depending on the meditative state, into a very strong alpha peak, which can both be associated with different states of meditation. But I don't have the full headset where I can really get, into the high gamma, for instance, which I'd like to, which would be, a very complex, deep meditative state. Yeah, Paula.
I'm curious, did you maybe measure with the same machine, your brain waves like in a REM phase of sleep? And is there any correlation of you doing meditating with sleep phases and sleep waves you get?
That's interesting. I don't think I have equipment to do that right now, but what I'm going to tell you about this study that I published, I showed the effects of like massage and outdoors on heart rate variability. the software that was made by the Russians is really amazing and very little known. I didn't believe that it actually did what it said until I found the research papers in Russian and had them translated and then read them and read through all the math, which I have a pretty good math background. Just from the RR data in your heartbeat, besides calculating heart rate variability, they claim to, number one, be able to identify the distribution of your brainwave energy from delta up to high beta. And they also claim to measure the health of your 12 different main 12 acupuncture meridians. And I was like, originally like, no way they can do that. But then I read the papers, and then I did some experiments with a couple different acupuncturists where we measured my meridians before treatment. And then we decided on a meridian to focus on, like the liver meridian. And then after treatment, we measured again. And a lot of them jumped up, but the liver meridian jumped up more than all the rest. And that made me be a believer of the system. But again, most people still don't believe it. But yeah, Paul, that's an interesting question. I'd like to do that. I don't have the equipment right now to do that, though.
I had one more question. Like, when did you start practicing the practice that you just mentioned just now? The 10 to 15 minutes meditation, like 4 breaths per minute. When did you start that? Like, how old were you when you first started that? And do you do that like every day?
Well, so about 20 years ago, I was practicing Tai Chi, and I would meditate regularly with that. And I didn't really have a lot of, you might say, progress. I felt some energy flow in my hands during the steady meditation, but that was about it. And then I gave that up to become a musician. And I started again about a year and a half ago. And a couple of things led to that. I started seeing an energy healer who's also a cranial sacral therapist. I also had a past life Akashic record reading from somebody, and I did a guided therapy session with two doctors with psilocybin. And after that, I started having really amazing experiences, and I started meditating regularly. And through my research on heart rate variability and breath work and things, I started trying to breathe slower and slower. And that's when that switch occurred. And now I try to practice that every session.
By any chance, like, do you have any MRI scans before you started this conscious practice and after?
That's a great question too. I have had scans beforehand. I've not had one since, but yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye out for that in case I ever need another one of my brain.
Yeah, that'd be quite interesting to see.
Sorry.
Yes.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I'll tell you, I also run a healing meditation group for women with chronic illness. There's some scientific evidence growing that, your thoughts, humans can affect reality. It's very hard to predict, hard to control, but there's some really interesting experiments from Princeton University. And we recently had an interesting, I'll say, success where a lady was estranged from her younger daughter, and she wanted to heal that relationship. And about a week after our session, we usually have about 8 people on this group meditation. And about a week later, she got a postcard out of the blue from her younger daughter, and she was just blown away. So I'm very much a believer also in what they call intentional reality creation, although I'm careful with how I use it.
I was wondering, have you tried microdosing
Yes, I love microdosing.
with psilocybin?
Yes.
Okay.
So when I was younger, I was very introverted and not very empathic. And now I'm just the opposite. My session woke me up in that manner. My wife tells me she and I have switched roles about going to parties. I've started doing what's called ecstatic dancing, and I bring maracas and I energize the whole crowd with them. And I do microdosing when I dance, and it just helps me feel the crowd so much better.
I went to aesthetic dance one time and we were told specifically not to do anything before. And I can say it was very intense experience for me. I could definitely feel the energies and everything. It was very cool.
Yeah, they tell us also no drugs and no alcohol. I don't feel like what I'm doing is harming the experience and the experience for the other people. I don't think
Yeah,
they
I
even know
agree.
I'm doing it.
Agree.
I'm sorry, Nafis or Raven, do you had a question? I'm not sure. Was that for the fortune teller?
My fortune teller. Yes, I got a Chinese fortune teller that never met me in my life. And he told me I have too much chi. And anybody that knows me can confirm I definitely have too much chi. So when you were mentioning Tai Chi, that got me reminded. Can I control my chi with Tai Chi?
How about your balance between yin and yang?
Man.
Okay.
Oof.
Yeah, I've been working on my female side.
Yeah, I don't know. It's pure chaos. That is my yin and yang. That's my balance.
Mm. Well, this has been great. Anything else?
Yeah, I had one more question. As you're a musician and a meditator and someone who has tried microdosing and altered states of consciousness, have you noticed any similarity between like in music? I mean, I think anyone who plays the instrument knows that like you can reach that flow state. Like when you're improvising or jamming with your favorite song, you reach a point where you feel like you're connected to something that is beyond yourself. Like you have a sense of ego dissolution, right? And then you can play for like an hour. It feels like you just played for a minute. The same thing sometimes happens with meditation or even like on micro dose, not micro, but probably like mega doses of psychedelics. So have you noticed like the same efficacy of, let's say, if you're meditating for 3 months, or let's say if you're playing an instrument and reaching that flow state for 3 months, or you're like microdosing or macro dosing, all of the routes, like, do you find it to lead to the same results, or do you feel like it's a bit different but like intertwined in some ways?
That's an interesting question. I currently am bringing along two musicians who have not played a performance. We're going to do a performance in the summer. We've been jamming for a few months, and we smoke marijuana, but we haven't done mushrooms yet. And I think I feel the need, but I haven't done it yet. But we get into a flow state anyway, even without doing the mushrooms. And everything we do is improvisational. I don't do any prearranged or composed music since my first show about 15 years ago. Everything now is improvisational. I think that gives you the ability to get into flow easier. But yeah, once we get going, it can just go and go. And I'm a trained keyboard player, but I'm enjoying playing percussion more and more these days. It's very. I just finished reading a book about. It's called when the drummers were women, because these days most of the good drummers are considered men. But the history up until Roman times, the drummers were all women, and they were priestesses in various cults. And there's a really amazing history since Neolithic times about that. But various cult ceremonies were accompanied with drums and tambourines and things. And I'm really enjoying the percussion side these days, as well as I still have my synthesizers. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question or not.
So okay, let me rephrase then. Let's say if you meditate for 10 minutes a day properly, or you play an instrument and get into a flow state for like 15 or 20 minutes a day, as a substitute, like, do they work as substitutes in a way? could they work as substitutes to enhance your ability to step into flow state faster as a training for that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would say yes, for sure. I mean, this is probably too much information, but someone told me to try this a while ago, and I agree with it. Try to meditate before sex, and that is pretty amazing as well. But yeah, that's a good idea. I'll have to try that. I mean, me and my friends, we meditate together sometimes, but we've never tried meditating and then playing.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I've enjoyed this. It's been great questions leading to some good discussion. Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
quite interesting and very interesting, actually, the experiences that you have and the perspectives, and then the amount of like rigor for data. It's quite fascinating. You don't see a lot of people like connecting all these dots so seamlessly, you know. So.
Yeah, and I would like to get more involved in some of the group's experiments. I got away from the group for a while. I had rotator cuff surgery last year, and it was on my primary dominant side, so it was hard to use a computer. But yeah, I'm considering. I do mouth taping occasionally. I might join that experiment. So yeah.
If you're taking berberine, please let me know, because we were running like a N2 trial on berberine for the last few months, me and Vincenzo.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not currently taking it, but I was taking it until recently, and I switched back to I was taking one metformin and one berberine, and now I switched back to just 2 metformin, partly because I get it prescription and it's cheaper than buying the berberine pills. But if I can still join that, yeah, I'll be in touch. Yeah, let's discuss it.
Or anything else that you have, like if you're tracking any new supplements that you're taking, just give us a shout out. We would love to know, like if you're testing the before and after, or every month you're doing the blood works and trying something new. Please do share it with us so we know what to try and what not.
Yeah, I feel pretty lucky with getting blood tests. I have, number one, a functional integrative doctor, and I was his 4th patient when he opened his clinic about 10 years ago. And so he's pretty good about when I ask for a blood test, as long as I can tell him why, he usually gives me a lab slip for it. So yeah, I do have flexibility there. So yeah, I'll try to contribute that way.
That would be great. We are actually planning to start our alpha GPC trial from next month or next month, hopefully. So I'll keep you posted on that. A few of us are planning that.
Yes, because I took that very briefly several years ago, and I took the CDP, acetylcholine, very briefly also. And I don't remember why I stopped, but yeah, I'm interested.
Which was better, cytokinin or alpha GPC for you?
I didn't get enough data to really decide. I can't remember why I stopped. My suspicion for me is that the acetylcholine is going to be better, but I don't want to try to tell you how to run the study.
Cool.
All right, Em, thank you for the invite. It's been good. Hope other people like it.
Thanks, Chris. This was really cool. I really enjoyed it.